All right, so we are here today for our jam session on how to build a successful branded NFT experience. And Matt, I know when we were talking about this, it was specifically not just NFTs, it was branded experience. So I know that's part of what you're going to get into. But Matt, why don't you first kind of introduce yourself, what you're up to, what you're doing in this space, and and before we do that, also, I mentioned we donate for each one of these, since it's a lot cheaper to do a virtual event than it is an in-person one. We donate to a charity of the choice of the host. And I know you have a special one that your family actually created. So would love to hear about that as well.
So yeah, I'll give you the whole overview. But thank you guys for first having me and for tuning in. My name, Matt Wurst. I am the CMO and co-founder of Mint, which is a tech platform for brands or creators, publishers, platforms. It really doesn't matter because we're a white label solution for anyone who is or wants to build for the next generation of digital marketing, brand building, communities, and consumer experiences. And my personal background, or I guess my professional background, is I have a multi-decade, well into my third decade of leading digital agencies and brands, but in most cases working with many of the biggest brands in the world. And my comfort zone, Dave, you talk about Web 1, Web 2, like my comfort zone has always been also at that convergence of creative and marketing and technology. Early days Web 1, building NBA.com into something respectable, built the first social media agency, a company called 360i in like 2007 and 8. When no one really knew what that was. So for me to pull the ripcord, if you will, on agency life and build for Web3 shows just how much I believe in the power and the potential of blockchain applications for marketers specifically. And as I've been meeting with brands and CMOs and everyone hand-to-hand combat, as well as at some big events, my goal over the last year and a half since we launched this has been to just help provide a clear understanding of initially like key definitions and core concepts, and then a few ideas on how to get started. But as you'll see, removing some of the barriers to entry from a technology perspective for the brands and the marketers, as well as the end consumer, has been an important part of what I have been building. So as far as the organization that I represent, 15 years ago, my sister, who is an educator by trade, created an organization called Triad, which is founded on this idea that local leaders, whether it's educators or athletes in underprivileged and third world countries, have the best opportunity to educate people who may not have access to proper healthcare, whether it's around malaria or HIV. And the way to actually prevent the spread of this was through education. So by bringing in musicians and athletes and artists and actually creating curriculum around improv, theater, and things like that in these very, very, very underprivileged towns and rural communities in like sub-Saharan Africa, that's the way that they're going to get people to not only participate and be empowered, but also to learn their status. Because the biggest issue with HIV and AIDS in Africa is that people have it and they're spreading it and don't know it because they don't want to get tested. So this organization is really about awareness and education as a means of prevention. So it's called Triad Trust. You can go to triadtrust.org. But thank you guys for just sharing and participating in that education as well.
So fun fact: my first job out of college was for the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative. So that's where I started in that space in America.
Well, thank you then for your participation.
All right.
See on my screen.
Tokenization for brands. We see the deck.
Because I have like 11 screens here. So that's on that screen. You're over here. So I'll be looking back and forth. But what I'm sharing with you now is, again, a more condensed, focused version of what I shared actually last week with the entire marketing community at Brand Week or Adweek's Brand Week. But for me, this becomes the key point here. It's that we have an opportunity to take a more step-by-step practical approach to this. You don't have to jump all the way into step 7 and build a virtual metaverse on day one. But if we follow some of the rules and like the playbook that we know and understand as marketers that's existed for decades digitally, but for 100 years, then this shouldn't be that intimidating, and we should be, pretty effective in how we dip our toe in the water. So, and again, David started talking about this early on, but the difference. But let me just move this because I have big Zoom toolbar in my way and I can't see you all. But Web 1.0 saw publishers and brands as creators. And for me, that novelty was being able to view content, right? Reference materials that we used to have to go to the library for, or sports scores or news. The messaging was very much peer-to-peer, and email was exciting, but wasn't necessarily going to bring the entire universe into a space overnight that was going to change everything. And that's why I think the bubble burst, because there were some initial promises made around what Web 1.0, as we call it now, could be and could deliver. But Web 2.0 saw the masses becoming creators, right? It was Wikipedia entries and Amazon product reviews and blog posts and YouTube videos, and user-generated content became free labor. But the big winners were these centralized media platforms: Google, Amazon, Facebook. Like, the rise of digital communities was awesome, and it was a multi-directional conversation and collaboration that was taking place. But I think we all realize now that those platforms owned our data, they owned our content, and all the interactions that were happening happened in their ecosystems and on their platforms. And the biggest flaw that exists in Web 2.0 platforms is trust. We put our trust in these multi-trillion-dollar companies that they're not going to abuse their power as they grow. So Web 3 grew out of this as, an idealistic way to re-decentralize the web with new open technology that's verifiable and permissionless and built on different platforms and protocols that would make transactions open for everyone to see. And that's the blockchain technology. So blockchain is the underlying principle, whether you are in supply chain business or the marketing business, but it unlocks these new value exchanges and business models and systems that just don't rely on corporations or governments or central financial banks to make moral choices, but instead render bad choices almost impossible. And that's where Web3 and tokenization has its root. But from a marketing perspective, blockchain acceleration over the last 2 to 3 years has really happened with the proliferation of two things. One is crypto, which is an asset class, and the other is non-fungible tokens, which is a different asset class. And many of these initial NFT creator projects tied the two things together, crypto and blockchain, crypto and NFTs on the blockchain within these marketplaces. But early success was very much rooted in collectability, in speculation, and in borrowed relevance, really, right? Like the blue chip PFP projects like CryptoPunks and CryptoKitties and Bored Apes. There was a brief gold rush that ensued, but as brands got involved and IP rights holders got involved, there were some new opportunities to engage and enhance their community that had already existed. But the two ways they did it, one, we were just talking about this, right? It was, how do you partner with existing or original Web3 creator projects to maximize participation? But that was very exclusive. The second was brands like Star Wars or the NBA that have very desirable IP, could leverage their cultural relevance and tap into the collectibles craze that happened during the pandemic. So those are the two ways that the collectible NFT 1.0 market got started. But the next real phase that I think we're all, now as we slow down thinking about, brands were dipping their toe in the water and experimenting, but putting strategic frameworks in place and understanding what branded activations can and should offer meant realizing this is going to be more than colorful art. It's going to be more than cash grabs. So learning from some of the successes of that NFT 1.0 project model of gamification, this blank to earn, play to earn, watch to earn, drink coffee to earn, right? That's what's starting to incentivize this. But the tech is also evolving. In many ways, the tech around this is ahead of the consumer and the brand. But if we can teach these brands about how tokens and NFTs specifically can be keys to accessing experiences or reward for participation, they can be bought and sold, they can be given away, they can be earned, they can be claimed in real life. Like, there are so many different ways to do this. That's the first hurdle that we will clear. The second is educating the brands that the barriers to entry that existed with NFT 1.0 are going away. And that's part of what I do. But that's the challenge for brands and consumers now in preventing more mainstream adoption. It's the tech platforms have created disjointed experiences, different blockchains, different tools, different experiences and ways in, as well as just this overwhelming deluge of information. Like, I feel it, I see it every day. It's like, where do I even go to read who's doing what well? But too many brands that, or too many platforms that specialize in one area of this ecosystem, too many that still require having crypto or wallets or transferring things back and forth and connecting to websites that look like they were created in 1997. That's just not going to drive this process forward. And also, like, there were scams, right? There were big marketplaces where you didn't know if the real brand project that you were looking at was something that you should invest in, and they were adjacent to other things that, like, I was doing a demo, by the way, for a brand on OpenSea, and what popped up next to their brand, in addition to the fakes, were these weird porn things that were happening, and I wanted to, like, close out very quickly. I'm like, actually, you know what? This is an important lesson. This is what's happening right now, and why the opportunity to put some parameters around what you're doing and where you build your ecosystem can be important. And that's where we are now. We're building NFT 2.0 with all of these considerations in mind. Established brands that spent the past decade investing in Web 2 models to drive reach and engagement and conversion and all that, I think they're going to lead the way. And that's the opportunity here. But we have some work to do beforehand. And that's revisit the marketing playbook, understand how adding layers of ownership and experiences and different models for companies to enhance their brand, right? That's not reinventing the wheel, but enter new markets and engage their consumers and target audience segments even more effectively with different concurrent projects, right? Engage, like, this is all the opportunity. But the objective is to now, as we get into NFT 2.0, create a more valuable value exchange. Like, what's meaningful for the consumer, and what can the brand offer them? What's the output going to be? What's the outcome that we're trying to achieve? It's stronger digital communities. I heard very early on throughout this process, even to today, like, we're still early, right? You guys hear that when you talk about Web3, like, oh, we're still early. That's partially correct, but the tech is further ahead than the consumer now. So we have an education gap, and closing that gap together, that's what I do. So the key talking points that I deliver when I'm on my roadshow, I pulled them together for you guys, but it's like, the barriers to entry are disappearing. The tech is ready. You don't need crypto. We've solved all the problems, so don't let that be an issue. You also don't have to call them NFTs, right? FIFA launched a project today. It's a collectibles project, which is kind of 1.0, but they've got a roadmap. And now they never use the term NFT. Starbucks announced a project that's coming, and they didn't use the term NFT. So I think just being aware that, like, the tech might bring people ahead as long as the value is there in ways that we don't have to overcomplicate it from a communication perspective. We also know that this is not a scam anymore. The brand creating these are not scammers. Like, that's the biggest lesson here. Like, oh, how do I know it's real? Well, if you're a brand and you build your project and communicate it, the value of your brand behind it is legit. The next myth that I often hear is that these are bad for the environment. And with the British spelling for you guys, the idea of proof of work versus proof of stake blockchains is, like, super nerdy, but sometimes I need to get into it because there are different understandings that people have. A proof of work blockchain that Bitcoin and the original Ethereum transactions took place on require groups and groups of people to authenticate and verify transactions on the blockchain. It was slower and required a lot of energy. You might as well be burning down rainforests. But what ends up happening now is the evolution of this to a proof of stake blockchain is more energy efficient, because the transactions are validated through randomly selected miners who, just check and make sure that it's legit. It's like 10 to the 8th more energy efficient. The Ethereum just merged and upgraded to a better protocol. But sometimes I'm like, you know what? Don't even worry about this. My job, your job as marketers is not to understand exactly how blockchain technology works. It's like when you get on a plane, you pick your destination, you decide whether you want to fly in first class or you're sitting middle seat coach, but you really need to know what all the buttons in the cockpit do and what the flaps and the slats do. No, you trust that someone's going to drive it for you and fly the plane in a safe way. That's kind of similar to what I think marketers need to understand about this ecosystem. Doesn't require crypto anymore. That's the good news. I think many of the platforms have made this much more accessible, whether it's Coinbase, where you can buy with a credit card, or our platform. We work with a company. Initially, we built with Dapper Labs, who were the first to bring millions of people onto the blockchain through NBA Top Shot. But if all you need is a credit card and you don't need to connect MetaMask to your website, like, that's going to bring many more people. This is the big one that kind of resonated last week with a lot of the marketers who hear about metaverses or the metaverse or the multiverse or whatever we want to call it. And defining the terms is important. For me, and it was just added to the dictionary, like the Oxford English Dictionary last week's, and I don't know if I fully agree with their definition, but to me, a metaverse is a virtual world or a community where individuals can interact with one another in unique ways, whether it's a game or a habitat. It can be built on the blockchain with crypto and with NFTs as in world currency, but many of them are not. Many of them are really just AR, VR worlds. And there's not one interconnected metaverse. So I just don't think most consumers are really ready for this yet. Yes, gamers are, and Gen Z people are getting into it more. But what we need from Web3, like the next generation of the internet, might actually be less escape or entertainment in the metaverse and more invention that gives us an emotional grounding, expanse, and practical functional utility. And that's the first step for me, is understanding like the expectations and behaviors around these people, and then what tokens can do to get there. And then the last piece of this is utility. Utility to me is the real application for marketers that's going to continue to evolve. New apps and platforms and games that are just springing up on the blockchain. That's how you get anyone to use a Web3 app or experience, right? The answer to strategy is tokenomics now. But what is it that, the business model of nearly every proposed Web3 platform entails distributing tokens in some way, whether you sell them or give them away, but incentivizing the end user to claim them or collect them or buy them or win them or earn them in some way that then improves the platform to make the value of those tokens go up. It doesn't have to be financial, but just by making it more inclusive and then making people who are in it feel like it's more exclusive. So the takeaway that I will deliver to a brand is like, you know what? You may not actually be ready for fully decentralized Web3 yet, and that's okay. You may never be. The current corporate ownership models, whether it's a startup or a publicly traded company or the legal and operational challenges that exist, like, you don't have to change the way you're operating by giving stocks and turning them into a DAO. Like, that's cool for some new and startup brands, but existing brands don't have to go all the way that way. And what they need to think about more is, how do we get first to Web 2.5, not yet Web 3.0. That's the goal. Together is to bring innovative features of Web3, blockchain openness. I tweeted this today, but like smart contracts and digital creative and direct to community engagement, combining that and finding the right balance with Web 2 models of search and social and influence and creation. And that's, I have other slides that I can get into, or I can run through in like 30 seconds, but the step-by-step process is a Web 2.5 process of like revisiting your objectives. They're not going to change, but what is changing is the fact that you have new tools that can better segment. So different types of tokens can achieve different types of objectives within your marketing playbook, right? If it's reach, if it's consideration, if it's loyalty and retention, you can use different tokens within a concurrent model and scale that over time. And that's where the strategy comes into play yet again. But also defining at the outset that value exchange that I was talking about. What experiences are you providing? What rewards, incentive, whatever, to get people to do something? By owning a token associated with a brand, even if it's not an ownership share of your brand, there's skin in that game. So defining the collectible baseline that people want to own, what content that unlocks, what types of rewards and incentive models you can build. And then ultimately, on our platform, we built a multi-token authentication system. What that sounds like, it's very fancy. But if you're like the NFL, you can say you need to have a Pepsi NFT and an ABI Bud Light NFT, and you can get into our ecosystem. Most brands aren't building for that yet, but it shows how enterprise product brands or promotional partners and sponsors can create something. The consumer experience needs to be simplified. That is why we built the tool that we built. The ability to sell, to distribute, to engage, to redistribute and provide experiences all in one brand-owned ecosystem is what we built. We flipped the model on its head. Instead of building for third-party exchanges, we give brands the platform to actually do all of this within their own and operated environment. So that revisits not only the marketing playbook, because yes, you need to promote and talk about it and leverage your channels to do this, but what that really does and what this really means is you're reorganizing your digital architecture. You're putting your owned and operated content back at the center. Instead of pushing everything out, you're leveraging content on your social channels, your out of home or your programmatic to bring people back to your website, to your blog, to your e-commerce page. And this is really the paradigm shift for brands in Web3. It is no longer centralizing everything on 2 or 3 platforms. It's empowering you to reclaim ownership of your content, of your data, and the relationship with the consumer. So that's what we talk about. And at the end, you still want to create something compelling and colorful and fun that people want to own. But knowing what that unlocks and what it ties to is where we come in with our agency partners or our brands. It's still that holy trinity of brand agency technology. That's what we are. We're a technology platform. But knowing that not every brand fully understands how to do this just yet requires us to lean out. And I think where my agency background comes into play. So that's the story. It went a little bit longer than I thought it might, but hopefully you guys have a good understanding of this space. And now we can riff, now we can brainstorm, now we can, you can challenge me, you can tell me why I'm full of shit, I don't care. But I really do believe that in this, and you see how the different use cases can be applied in different ways. Starbucks is going all in on its loyalty program as a reward mechanism, and they don't use the term NFT because instead of earning points, your points are tokens that have liquidity on the blockchain. I mean, super simple, but like they're going to bring 1 billion people into Web3 who don't even realize it in the next year.
Yeah. And I think, you call it NFT 2.0. I've always talked about this second wave of brand activations, the ones that kind of took their time to actually get educated and figure out how they could add value through this new technology, through this new type of approach. And that's what we're seeing right now with the likes of Starbucks. And on the other end of the spectrum, I think you're still seeing, I guess it would put a bit of a positive spin on it to call it NFT 1.0 projects, because I think of them as just marketing for the sake of marketing, these brands that are just kind of jumping on the bandwagon and doing these activations. And there's no real understanding of the value that the technology can unlock. We had our weekly news podcast earlier today, and we were talking about the Grey Goose activation that they did around the US Open. So they created a virtual VIP section in Decentraland. And there were like 50 people who went.
Yeah.
So things like that.
They're not ready for it yet. Like, wouldn't it be more powerful if you start to seed tokens in a community where people understand that they could get something out of this, and maybe you bring them along with you, and it's something over time that can unlock and become a currency in a virtual world. But I had the same experience in a Miller Lite virtual Decentraland bar. I don't know about you. I don't go to a bar to drink. I go to a bar to hang out with my friends. And, like, you're looking around, you're the only person there, you might have a
But
problem.
I really liked how you teed it up. And I think the biggest thing for me, so I totally agree with your point, the big one about kind of utility. And I always think of that as value. I think at the end of the day, marketing is the same. Web 1.0 or good marketing, effective marketing is the same. 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, analog, going back to the history of time. It is a value exchange with the customer in a way that shifts their perception and behavior around your brand. That's it. However you get there based on the technology, the channels, the content that you use, it's the same thing. It really is relatively basic. But I do think, and I really agree with that slide that you had and liked how you framed it up in terms of the barriers, I think it was to brands actually doing this well.
Yeah.
I think education, marketers just spending more time, listening to things like this, understanding the technology, the community, what's already been done, what hasn't been done, just getting their hands dirty, to be honest. But then working backwards from how can this technology unlock value in a differentiated way, and working backwards from there, as opposed to working forwards from, hey, we should do something with NFTs and Web3. Let's figure out what it is. I think that's where brands kind of get into, I was going to say trouble, but actually I think a lot of them are super happy because they get their headlines and they get their awards and all that stuff that our industry really loves. But in terms of actually growing,
mindset, you're right.
Growing
and I
the
think
brand
that's
and
why we've
business.
seen a little bit of a slowdown.
Right.
Someone might call it the trough of disillusionment on the Gartner curve, but it's really not. It's actually understanding that this is just another set of tools that fit into your framework, right? I remember many years ago, we had this slide. It was like audience insights, communication strategy, content creation, engagement, measurement, optimization. And it was to like explain to the CMO of Coke why they needed a Facebook page. We're like, we have a website. Why do we need to do this?
Yeah,
like,
it's the same thing.
History
repeats itself. So Matt, before we turn the recording off and just have the discussion as a group off the record, what is the thing or the next couple things that someone listening should go do right now if they're not in this space yet, want to learn more? What are kind of the practical, actionable next steps that folks should take?
So if we are talking as marketers, there's actually a great curated community called The Jump, which is just for brands and agencies and engaging in a judgment-free space to sort of self-educate, but it's really peer education. I think that's an incredible community. There are, I would say follow me on Twitter because I talk about this a lot, but there are some really great thought leaders who are just talking about and sharing examples. So again, education is key, but getting an NFT and understanding like how the process actually works in a simplified way is a great step. We actually have a demo we do, but we work with Shopify. Like if we're going to sell NFTs as a brand with you, we could go through Shopify where it's like selling a t-shirt or a hat or merchandise where all you need is the credit card. But if you, and whether someone watching now or someone later checks out nft.mint.store, it's a free NFT, but you'll see that all you really need to do to claim an NFT is click a few buttons, because the key that is required for this is no longer having a wallet. All it is having an email address. So that's a good experience to begin to demo and understand how to do it. Even today, as I said, like FIFA, if you're a World Cup soccer fan, or even if you're not, they dropped the first collection of NFTs in their still very NFT 1.0 collectible world, but for $5. So for $5, you could get some cool soccer NFTs. But there is no substitute to doing it. The biggest doubters and skeptics have never actually done this. They hear about it, they're confused, they think the barriers to entry that I was talking about are still there, and they're not. There's no reason not to at least talk to an agency partner or talk to others about simple ways to get in to this space.
Cool. All right, Matt. So we'll continue the conversation, but we'll shut the recording off. But thank you for that. And thank you for the work that you and the family are doing with Triad as well. And we'll include a link to that in the video show notes as well.